Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rest, Reset, and Reflect. This is my first time doing a LinkedIn Live, so let me know if you're joining, if you can hear me, if you can see me okay. I'll give folks a few minutes to gather. And while people are gathering, just want to give some context on what this time will be. And actually, before that, I'll just say for whoever is on and joining, if you want to get yourself in a comfortable position, if you're able to in a quiet place, if you're at home, maybe you want to grab a cozy blanket or beverage. If you maybe are at the office, maybe you can find a quiet corner to just be. But if not, and if you do kind of have to be in a public space where there are folks around you, just see how you can kind of maybe create a little bubble for yourself. And while we get started, I'll take a few minutes to introduce who I am and just what this time will be. My name is Nyam. I am a sabbatical coach and writer. I worked for about 15 years as a product and project manager, kind of going between those two functions. My short story that I'll share a little bit more later in this time is that I lived through multiple burnout cycles in my career. In 2022, I took a self-initiated sabbatical, which was really spurred on by a moment, what I call a personal moment of reckoning during the pandemic, of wanting my life to look differently than those burnout cycles. And so now I work with mid-career tech and corporate folks who are in the midst of transition, and in particular partnering with folks to create career breaks that are intuitive, joyful, and creative as an avenue for inner transformation. So that's a little bit about me. And in terms of this time and space, I am doing Rest, Reset, and Reflect to offer a really informal space for folks to take a pause in their day. So I know for folks, if you're on the East Coast like me, it's midday. If you're if you're on the West Coast, I know you're just starting your day, and if you're ahead, you're maybe mid afternoon or evening. But giving folks a chance to reconnect with their body, their breath, their presence in the midst of days that are often kind of very like head heavy, and where it's easy to get disconnected with ourselves. So this time will always feature a brief time of a kind of guided meditation as a chance to do that rest and reflect, or rest and reset during your day. And the reflection portion will look differently. So today I'm going to invite us to dive into the topic of reclamation. And what does that mean? What does that have to do with career breaks in your career? And that's kind of setting the stage for that. As I mentioned, this is my first time going live, so I'm not totally sure where I can see comments because I don't see any coming through, if there are any, but we'll sort that out for next time. But hopefully folks that are gathered are able to hear and connect in. So I am going to go ahead and get things started with a brief meditation. It'll be about probably be about like 7 to 10 minutes. So as I mentioned before, if you're able to get yourself in a position where you feel comfortable, and if you're able to in a place where that feels private, but if not, just finding a space where you feel comfortable. And whenever you feel comfortable, and if you're able to, I invite you to either close your eyes if that feels good or keep a soft gaze. And as you close your eyes or have that soft gaze, I invite you to again check in with your body of if there's any way that you want to maybe shift or move into a position that feels more comfortable. And as you do that, I invite you to just start noticing your breath. There's nothing that you need to do or change. Maybe just notice how it feels going in and out of your body. Maybe you want to notice the temperature. Maybe you notice how it feels for your chest to expand and contract. And as you notice your breath and become aware of it, I also invite you to tune into if there's any way that you need to move your body or place your hands on your body that would help you feel more grounded and settled wherever you are. Maybe you want to place your hand on your heart. Maybe you want to gently rock back and forth. What positioning of your body helps you feel more grounded and more settled? And as you keep sinking into that sense of feeling grounded, I invite you to notice any points of contact that you have, perhaps with the seat, perhaps with your feet touching the floor. Maybe your back is against a chair or a couch. And I just invite you to see if you can sink even deeper into these points of contact. I invite you to sink into these points of contact, seeing if you can let your body be heavy, if you can sink into them and let them support your full weight. How can you sink even deeper so that you can really experience these points of contact holding you up? And as you lean into these points of contact for support, I invite you to start noticing your heart and heart space. Again, maybe you want to place a hand on the heart, or maybe not. And I just invite you to start noticing what's present in this space, what feels alive. And if it feels good, I also invite you to make any adjustments, big or small, any movements in your heart or chest space. Maybe you want to roll your shoulders, maybe a movement to expand your chest. What is this space calling for in your body? I invite you as you keep tuning into that heart space to also breathe into that space. Tuning into what parts of you feel like they're calling for a movement or breath. And if it feels good and you're able to, you could even do a deep exhale and let sound also emerge. As you're tuning into that heart space, I invite you to gently bring your awareness down to your pelvic bowl. Just noticing what's present in this area. Perhaps you breathe into your left hip and then into your right. And then bring your awareness gently to your center. And here too, I invite you to make any adjustments, movements, sound, or breath that feel like this part of your body is asking for. Maybe you want to take a twist. Maybe there's a way that you want to stretch. Maybe there's a way of breathing into the space that feels good. And as we've centered into our heart space and pelvic area, I invite you to notice if there's any part of your body that is maybe calling for breath or movement, big or small, or even sound. Inviting you, if you're able to and it feels good, to make any adjustments you need that feel good. And as you're tuned into your body, I'm going to invite you to sit with a reflection question. And as I offer this question, I invite you to see if there's a way, rather than it just sitting in your head, that you can see if you can tune into what your body has to say in relationship to this question. So that could look like movement in a certain way in response to that question. Maybe you breathe into a certain part of your body. Maybe you notice certain sensations in your body Maybe it does bring up certain thoughts, but just inviting you to see if you can move with the question in relation to your body. And the question I invite you to consider is, what do you need to reclaim? Again, what do you need to reclaim? As you consider that question, what do you notice in your body? Do you need to reclaim your breath? Is it your presence? Is it your voice? Do you need to reclaim your courage or creativity? Maybe you need to reclaim your health. Or maybe you need to reclaim relationships or community. Maybe it's intuition or moral clarity. And as you either sit with or move with this question, I invite you to very gently bring this reflection to a pause. Maybe you want to thank your body for any wisdom that your body surfaced. And when it feels good, I invite you to reconnect back into a space. Maybe you want to gently flutter your eyes open. Maybe you want to look around your space to reorient. And maybe you want to give your body a stretch or a shimmy, a shake that helps you feel like you're coming back into movement and space. And so, if I was with you one on one, this would be the time where I'd love to hear what surfaced up for you. But I invite you to, if there were things that felt resonant, to grab a journal, a piece of paper, or some way that you want to record that reflection of what came up with the question, what do I need to reclaim? And that could be a big question. So I invite you to keep sitting with it over days, weeks, months, and seeing what emerges and how you feel led to respond to that and maybe take action. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and share some thoughts on the theme of reclamation. I talked about at the top of this time that I work with mid career tech professionals to take career breaks. I also work with folks who are often navigating burnout and identity shifts in relationship to work. So, when I think about the work that I'm doing with people, reclamation is a huge part of that because work is such a significant portion of our lives. And often, the way in which modern work is set up, it is not always set up to where we find ourselves being that we can thrive as whole human beings at work. So when I think about career breaks, I ultimately think of them as an avenue of reclamation and an avenue of, in particular, reclaiming the fullness of our humanity, that we're humans, and that, as Trisha Hersey, who is the author of Rest is Resistance, talks about, that creating space for rest is not about being more productive, right? It's not about being a better laborer within capitalism or within workforces, but it's about a reclamation of our humanity, that we rest because we are human and it's a part of who we are and what we need. So I want to invite us to think about that definition of reclamation that I've just talked about. And I'm going to share a bit about this through my own story of career break that I took in 2022. I also often write about this, so I will also share links to that if you want to take a deeper dive into it. But I will start my story of reclamation by sharing that as I mentioned before, I've worked for 14 or 15 years within tech or tech adjacent spaces and digital agencies as a product and project manager and lead. But I very much fell into this world. When I graduated from college, I was a creative, sensitive, conscientious young woman, and I actually thought I was going to go into ministry. I That's a longer story for another time, but the short story is that I ended up originally working a temp job at a Silicon Valley startup, and I ended up then working there full time for 2 years. So that was a very different world than I'd ever been in. And there were some ways where it brought to life a lot of my competencies and resourcefulness that I didn't know that I had. But it was unfortunately also the start of a burnout cycle that I repeated over 14 or 15 years of my career. And this looked like, working really hard, or often working very long hours, often taking on things that, in retrospect, probably weren't things that I needed to take on, burning out in a job, and oftentimes actually like leaving jobs before I had another one lined up because I was so completely depleted that I didn't even have capacity to think about how would I find a new job when I was totally gutted from the existing one. To give another example of how how deep this went at one of my jobs, and the people that I used to work with and know this, like I worked it wasn't uncommon for me to, like, arrive at the office at, like, 8 or 9 a.m. and, like, work well past midnight in the office. And that was something that was, like, for a season of time at that job that I was doing regularly. Um, in that same job, there were also times, where I would be sick, like, clearly, like, sick, and I needed to rest, but instead of resting, would I remember one particular time I grabbed a Jamba Juice smoothie with a ginger shot and I went into the office. So it was this really intense cycle through my career of being brutally intense on my body, and that led me to burnout. And I came to this moment of reckoning in 2021 during the pandemic, where even though through all of these experiences, I always took the time to reflect after I'd left a place to understand what was my part in the dynamic. And I did grow to see how there were ways I needed to advocate for myself. There were ways that I needed to put boundaries in place for myself so that I wasn't, taking my body to the brink, my body and my mind to the brink. But in my job, before I took my 2022 sabbatical, I felt that I was at the peak of my courage and growth in terms of self advocacy, in terms of advocating for my teams, and being really clear about here's what I need, here's what my teams need for us to thrive. Being very vocal about when we weren't set up in situations for us to succeed, that would lead us to situations where we needed to overwork. And unfortunately was not met speedily with support in the initial part of my tenure there. And I hit a moment in 2021 where I was obviously very blessed to be working remotely during the pandemic when we're in this global crisis and there are people who were being much more deeply impacted by it. But because we were in that global crisis, that much more I felt a deep sense of loss in terms of what I had lost from the 15 years of my life. That I felt deeply, where have the last 15 years of my life gone in these burnout cycles? And I had a moment of clarity that if I didn't do something differently, that this was going to be my pattern for the rest of my life. So that was the impetus for me planning a 1 year career break in 2022. Another time I'll go into more of kind of the particulars and specifics and practicals of how I did that. But I took a 1 year career break in 2022, and tying back to what I mentioned in terms of reclamation, reclamation emerged from my career break in a few ways. And some of these are ways that have emerged over time. But the first way was reclamation of my body and my health. I Until I had a context where I didn't need to be moving on an employer's schedule, I hadn't actually realized how disconnected I was from my body and how I was so used to overriding my body's signals. So, I mean, in the basic signals, right, of I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need to relieve myself. And, going back to that example I gave, right, of working from 8 a.m. to past midnight, I was clearly in a pattern where I wasn't honoring my body signals. And, being honest, workplaces don't always, they kind of subtly can discourage us from kind of tuning into what our bodies need when it comes to the sake of hitting deadlines, of needing to respond to situations that have often been kind of our urgency that's been manufactured. That's just what I'll say. I'm sure folks have unfortunately had that kind of experience. And when I had my career break in 2022, I started tuning back into my body's basic signals. And I also started incorporating, in particular, movement, more movement in certain ways, and started addressing some chronic health issues that I'm sure emerged because of the stress and how I had been engaging my body for the first part of my career. And in particular, that reconnection with my body, what it facilitated was a reconnection with my intuition. With intuition, I think our intuition, right, this sense of knowing that is not always rational. I firmly believe that so much of it lives in our bodies, that there are signals that our bodies can start to give us about a situation, about a person, about which kind of way makes sense to move. But if you are in the habit of constantly like overriding your body's basic signals, like again, right, like the hunger, the thirst, being tired, then you're not able to hear your body's more subtle signals. And that's the way intuition speaks. It's often very subtle. So that was the core foundational way that I experienced reclamation through my career break was that I reconnected to my body, and that gave me reconnection to my intuition. And that reconnection to my intuition has been the avenue that's given me courage and clarity to pursue what I needed to do for myself. So, explaining that, for me, I ended my 2022 career break and I naively thought I was going to have all the answers for my life and have a perfect plan of what I was going to do next. I didn't, but I did have clarity on certain things. One of the things that I ended my career break with clarity on was that I didn't want to be a full time employee anymore. I also had clarity that I was never going to find the work that I wanted in a traditional work setting. That even though I didn't know exactly how it would look, I just knew that because I had so many different interests and because of how I was wired and because of being a creative, that while I was really grateful in some ways for a lot of what I learned and the skills that I developed through traditional kind of corporate work, that long term, that wasn't going to be the place that I would find fulfillment. And that was an avenue of reclamation because it allowed me to own who I was and to not apologize for that, but to start acting in courage and clarity and creativity about what that meant for how I started showing up in the world, both personally and professionally. So after my sabbatical for a couple of years, been working doing different contracts at digital agencies, and within the midst of that started this sabbatical coaching practice. And this practice and this work in general is an avenue of reclamation for me because I have used it to bring together what seem like all these disparate parts of myself, being a very sensitive, slightly woo-woo person, being a creative, a writer, a musician, being a thinker. I love thinking. I love deep ideas. I love books and history and learning and strategy. I'm also very analytical and process driven in certain ways. So bringing together all these different parts of myself to create work in the world that I believe is to benefit the human collective and to partner with other professionals who I see who are navigating burnout, which feels like it's become an epidemic. within, well, honestly, not just within tech. I feel like many people are burned out, which makes sense given so many factors and so much of what's happening in the world. But this practice that I've created with sabbatical coaching is an avenue for me to reclaim what I didn't feel like I could bring in a full way into a corporate or tech career. I felt like I had to dull the parts of me that are sensitive to be to be more professional, to not be as emotional, to and also to protect myself. And so this coaching practice is a way that I am practicing that reclamation of career. So that's a brief bit of my story in terms of reclamation and how it relates to career breaks and career. So bring us back to that question that I offered at the beginning of this time and at the end of our meditation. What do you need to reclaim? And so reclamation will be deeply personal for you. It will look different than it looks for me, and it will look different than it looks for other people. So that's why, again, I invite you to keep coming back to this question and reflect on it. What I want to offer with this question, though, is that you don't need to take a 1-year career break to practice your reclamation. A 1-year career break may perhaps that's not accessible or feasible for you. Maybe even, a shorter break career break isn't accessible for you. But reclamation is not just about taking off a long period of time. It is about, I would argue, in small, accessible actions, beginning to practice your reclamation. And honestly, at the beginning, it may not be accessible for you to even do something like take a year off, right? What might be accessible to you are these small acts that I'm going to share a few examples, and that might seem very, very basic. But if you're someone who, like me, has been at points of burnout where it's like what I call like 911 burnout, like you can feel how your body is breaking. These were some of the basic things that I needed to do. So things like staying hydrated, like just set a timer like on the hour. And when that timer goes off, get up, stretch, drink a glass of water, like something hydrating. Move your body daily. And I don't necessarily mean if for you that means like going to the gym and working out hard or going for a run, great, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be maybe you start with maybe you stretch, maybe you take a short walk, maybe you have a pet and it's walking your pet. Maybe it is dancing around your living room for 10 minutes. It can really be any sort of way that you are moving out your body and shifting that energy. Another practice that I would invite that invites you to reconnect with yourself, to rest, reset, to reconnect with your body is not starting your day with your phone or a device or a screen, which I know can be really easy to do. If you use a device as an alarm clock, I invite you to maybe buy just a regular alarm clock and not use a device. But when we're starting our day with a device and we're starting our day with like looking at things, we're already disconnecting from ourselves at the start of the day rather than sitting with ourselves. And so instead of starting your day with a device, maybe you want to take a few minutes. Maybe you keep a notebook by your desk and you journal. If you're familiar with Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, you could do morning pages, which is essentially just a brain dump stream of consciousness for 3 pages first thing in the morning. Maybe you just want to sit and breathe, for a couple of minutes, just noticing how you feel. But maybe trying to delay when you pick up a device and start looking at it so that you're starting your day with yourself and in connection to your body. I'd also invite in that you can pick up a practice like journaling, like breath work, like meditation, as an avenue of reflection. And again, I'm all about these small practices. So this doesn't have to be, I'm going to meditate or journal for an hour. Can you do that for 5 minutes, right? Can maybe you do that for 5 minutes at the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, the end of the day? How can you do these really small practices that allow you to, again, rest, reflect, reconnect with yourself? And I offer these as practices of reclamation because the reality is that many of us are tired, exhausted, depleted, disconnected from ourselves. We're disconnected from the people around us. And there's no way that we can meaningfully make changes that we need to make in our lives if we are chronically operating on depletion. And the way that our society is set up, that is unfortunately kind of the norm. And it's sort of like it's like normal for us to be disconnected. And when we're disconnected from that way, we also are not able to access our creativity and our imagination. And in the times that we're in, we desperately need we need our creativity, we need our imagination, we need that resilience. And it starts with rest. And it starts with these small practices that we can do now. So you don't need to take a 1 year career break and leave your job in order to practice reclamation. You can start practicing reclamation by taking that question that I mentioned. What do you need to reclaim? Maybe every day you just start journaling about that question. Maybe every day you take a short walk and you notice what comes up in your mind or in your body as you sit with that question. So that's my offer in terms of the theme of reclamation. I would love to hear if you feel comfortable sharing either in my comments, or I'm always open to DMs to hear if anything resonated for you or came up for you. Again, like I mentioned, I this is my first time doing a LinkedIn Live, so I actually don't know how I can see comments. So I'll figure that out. I'll figure that out for next time. But would love to hear what has landed for you from this time, either from that theme of reclamation or from our opening time of meditation, if you feel led to share. What I also want to mention are a few things in terms of what you can look out for next. Today, I co-published an article with Amy Chen, who is CEO of Amy Chen Digital. We are both folks who I like to call us sabbatical alums, people who have taken sabbaticals. And Amy also has a practice where she, I believe it's annually, takes a sabbatical. So she's created a practice and a life and career and work for herself where she has a rhythm of taking sabbaticals. And our article is talking about what's the work of integrating your sabbatical insights into re-entry. And I know that's might not seem relevant to all folks because maybe some people are like, well, I haven't even taken a sabbatical. But it's important to consider because it goes back to this theme of reclamation and owning and practicing how we want to change our lives and careers in the ways that we can and are accessible now. So that article is out. Amy will be joining me on this LinkedIn Live next week. We'll be going live at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, so next week. The other thing that I want to offer are a couple of free resources that I have in that provide avenues for reflection. I especially am mindful of, I know today it sounds like Amazon announced layoffs of about 16,000 people. I know places like Shopify and Meta have also recently had layoffs. And this is another place where I want to offer space and possibility for reclamation, which I know can feel really hard and painful because it's something that you didn't choose. And what I want to offer in terms of reclamation for folks that are impacted is that I know it's a reality that you may need to hit the ground running to figure out what's next. I want to offer that even if you need to dive into a job search, how can you integrate maybe those practices that I mentioned before around rest, around reflection, so that even as you're entering into that job search, it's from a place where you are centering care for yourself, perhaps maybe even during this job search, that you are taking advantage of ways that maybe you're able to reconnect with your family and community that you're not able to in full time work. But really, like centering on that regardless of job position or status or what has happened, that you rest is your right and that you're worthy of being well. And so that you can enter that job search from a place of empowerment and care for yourself. And so, whether or not you have been impacted by those layoffs, the resources that I have are a couple of guides. One is the Burnout Reflection Guide, that is a practical resource for folks who may be navigating burnout and are trying to find immediate relief and are potentially even at a point where you feel like you need to exit out of a job. It really invites practical steps for how you can start finding immediate relief from burnout without totally jeopardizing your health, your well-being, your financial stability. So that is a free resource that if you're interested in, feel free to send me a DM. I'll be happy to send you that information. The other resource I have is the Mosaic 31 Days of Reflection on Career Grief and Transition. This is a resource that is kind of modeled after the stages of grief, but applied to careers. So for each day, for 31 days, there are a set of brief reflections, it's poetry, it's quotes and reflection questions that helps guide you through reflecting on loss that you're experiencing with a career. It could also just be changes that you feel stirring and helps you surface up how you can process that experience and then have insight for how you want to move forward from an intuitive and empowered place. Again, for that, if you are interested in that, feel free to send me a DM and I'd be happy to send it your way. And the final thing that I want to offer is that next month in February, which we're coming up to in a few days, this will be launching kind of closer to mid or late February, but Soulful Sabbatical Strategy session. So this will be a one-time session that is for a few different folks. One is if you are a person who either you're in your current job and you want to take a sabbatical, but you want to understand how you want to basically assess your options, your risk, the opportunity of taking a career break. This resource and this coaching session will help you do that in a thorough way, not just in terms of the logistics and finances personalized to you, but it also will fold in some somatic connecting, similar to what we did in this time of how do you tune into your body's wisdom so that you can assess your approach to your career break in a way that's deeply personalized to you, and that's also taking into account the financial and logistical realities. So that's one group of folks. It also may be if you are someone who's been impacted by layoffs recently and you actually do want to think about, can I actually like just take some extended time to rest, recover, to explore. That would also be a great resource for you because we can spend some time personalizing your situation and figuring out how and if it's possible for you to take that extended time. The last group of folks that the somatic, or excuse me, the soulful sabbatical strategy sessions, the alliteration is tripping me up, may be useful for is if maybe you are in a career break right now, but you're feeling kind of floaty, lost, you're not sure how to proceed in a break, or kind of trying to figure out re-entry. This session would also be a grounding time for you because we can work together on how you can approach re-entry, or how you can recenter and refocus your career break if you're feeling lost in the midst of it. So for those soulful sabbatical strategy sessions, again, with that, those coaching sessions that'll be launching mid to late February. And if you're interested in those, I have a current wait list for those. So send me a DM and I'd be happy to share more. With that, I'm going to close things out on this LinkedIn Live. If you joined, thanks for joining. And like I said, would love to hear if there was anything that resonated for you. Always happy to see a comment or send me a DM. And I leave you again with that reflection question. What do you need to reclaim? Thanks for joining again, and I will talk to you later.